I'm a 19-year-old mother. My mother-in-law is devastating my life. She has great length in our town that she lives, and she uses her influence because she doesn't like the way that I'm parenting, and she gets CPS involved in my life, and she gets them to take away my children where I am just totally beside myself. I don't really know what to do, so I give in and do what she's telling me to do. And guys, I'll tell you right now, you will not believe what she wants me to do. The surefire place to find a wicked individual is among religious folks, especially the ones who seem all well-respected in their circle. They use religion as a cloak to discreetly perform their acts of wickedness while being lauded in public. I'm an orphan who is estranged from what's left of her family. My siblings and I grew up in an abject poverty, and everyone looked out for themselves. I decided to move to another town to start life when I turned 18 years of age, and that was how I found myself in Arkansas. I was new in town and an easy prey for scammers, but I was saved from all of that by a group of religious folks who sought to add to their numbers. I was taken in by the church, and they set me up by providing me with an accommodation and a job, and they made me feel the kind of warmth I never felt in my family, and in return they had a member. It was in the church that I met Miss Lydia. Lydia was a rich widow who was kind and sweet on the surface. Most of her wealth, which her late husband had left for her, went towards charitable courses in the church and beyond. She had been very instrumental, and my accommodations and jobs, and Pastor Mark, the pastor of the church, always commended her and never failed to use her as an example of what living a selfless life was all about. You see, everyone in the church knew and respected Lydia for what she's done for the community. Her generous lifestyle earned her the title of Big Mommy. The same respect which they gave to her was equally given to her son Richard, even though neither deserved it. You see, Richard began drawing close to me from the very moment I set foot and was recognized as a member of the church. I was very appreciative of what the church and Richard's mother in particular had done for me, so I did not push Richard away as he drew closer to me. Besides, I got so comfortable in the church that I let my guard down around everyone. Richard used the situation to his advantage and began professing love to me. I was so naive. I know that there's nothing a man would not promise a lady when he wants to have his way with her. Besides, I felt I was in love, as Richard would spend time telling me about how we just dreamt that we would get married, have our kids, and have our own home. I was taken away by those words and even fantasized about our lives together. Richard had his way with me, and, well, pregnancy fell after that. I was excited when I discovered that I was pregnant, as I felt it was a step closer to our lives as a couple, but I was greatly disappointed when I broke the news to Richard. Richard scolded me for getting pregnant. He asked if I was a child and if I could not take care of myself to avoid such a pregnancy after sex. He then suggested that I get the pregnancy removed. The reaction that I got from him was absolutely shocking, to say the least, and I was hurt to discover that the words which were said during the heat of passion were just empty promises. All the same, I was scared to get rid of the baby. I took the issue to Madam Lydia, aka Big Mommy, as she's called, and expected her to treat the issue with justice and fairness, but it was at that point that I discovered the snake that had been hiding behind the religious facade. After bringing Lydia to the knowledge of my pregnancy and who was responsible, she began asking what was wrong and she had done to me to deserve the humiliation I was about to throw at her. I was trying to make sense of it because I was the one being humiliated by her son, and she began calling me names and accusing me of repaying her good deeds with wickedness. She claimed I had seduced her son Richard into getting me pregnant, and when I knew, just like everyone in the church, that he was engaged to be married, it was the first time I was hearing the news of Richard's engagement, and that was because his fiancée was not a member of the church. I tried making Lydia understand that I was never aware of the engagement, but she kept on throwing insults and accusations right at me. Lydia's accusations were not helping matters in any way, and I reacted by asking why she was defending her son when he knew he was engaged but chose to promise me a life of wedded bliss, simply because he wanted to sleep with me. Lydia still repeated the same thing which Richard had said, and she asked me to get rid of the baby, but I refused. Lydia was not handling the case as I felt she would, and I informed her that I was going to take the issue to the church and her pastor, Pastor Mark. Lydia knew the implications of me going to her pastor about the situation. He would be disappointed that her son was engaged and had gotten me, a newcomer to the church, pregnant. But that was not just what was at stake. He would be disappointed that his figure for a selfless living, aka Lydia, had suggested that I got rid of the baby, something which their faith frowned against. Lydia asked me to give her 3 days to decide on how best to handle the issue. Lydia called me 3 days later and said she had decided Richard would have to get married to me, as it was not best to have children grow up in a home where their parents did not live together. Although I knew her reason for taking the decision was because she wanted to save her face above all else. I was pleased with her response, as Richard was not getting away with what he's done. The marriage which was promised was going to be delivered at the end of the day. Lydia had Richard call off his wedding with his fiancée, who equally had a rich background, and it greatly affected her relationship with her friend. Lydia took Richard and me to go see Pastor Mark. She knew that she had to see her pastor to let him know that her son was now going to get married to me, and not the woman that he was previously engaged to. As expected, he raised an eyebrow the moment she mentioned the engagement between Richard and I. But Lydia further proved she was a snake by the words that came out of her mouth, and she went ahead and told Pastor Mark that it was after a prayerful consideration that she felt the Lord guiding Richard into taking the steps which he had. She claimed that though it was not an easy decision, Richard had decided to follow God's lead. Pastor Mark fell for the God's lead thing, and he even commended Richard for taking the bold step to follow through of how he was being led. He never knew the whole thing was because we were trying to prevent a scandal. He asked what we intended on holding the wedding, and we told him in just a few short days. He advised that we simply should not rush things, but took time to know each other before starting off the marriage journey. Lydia knew full well that if the marriage did not happen ASAP, the plan could be uncovered, so she told the pastor that if it was the Lord's leading, then there was no need to waste time, as God would only lead someone who is best for him. Richard and I got married a week later, and though I was glad the promise of marriage was indeed given, it soon dawned on me that it was the worst decision I've ever made. If I had known, I would have moved away with my pregnancy and not got married to Richard. Lydia, who was now my mother-in-law, had me move into the house where she and Richard stayed. I was hated by both mother and son. Richard, his anger, came from the fact that I was not the lady he wanted to marry, while Lydia was angry with me for ruining her relationship with her rich friends. I was living with people, but still felt lonely. I gave birth to twins, 2 boys, and Lydia claimed to the church that the pregnancy had come 3 weeks earlier than the due date. I kept quiet in all the lies that she told, as I did not want to ruin anything. Richard showed concern for his kids, but straight up neglected me. I learned by experience that it was better to be alone than to get married to someone who does not want you. The atmosphere in the home was too toxic for me. I had just been used as a breeding tool to give birth to kids, and that was all. Richard continued his escapades of jumping from one woman to the other, and he would leave town for some days and stay with some woman. I was not experienced the kind of love and desire which I wanted in my marriage, so I began looking for an opportunity to leave my mother-in-law and her son. Richard had come back from one of his usual trips, but the unexpected happened to him. His lover, whom was dating, had paid us an unexpected visit and confirmed the news that she heard about, him being married with children. His lover was enraged, so much that she had been played. After embarrassing him in front of me and his mom, she went away and filed a sexual harassment lawsuit. Lydia did her best to conceal the news that Richard's lawsuit, just as she had always covered his reckless lifestyle. But bad news spreads like wildfire around here, and it soon became common knowledge that the son of the selfless living woman had been arrested for infidelity. My husband never apologized to me for what he had done. My mother-in-law, too, did not raise the issue. She was only concerned about their image and that of her son. The church, in its fashion, was moved by the situation. They rallied around us to give emotional support by paying us visits and offering prayers on the behalf of us. I watched as they blamed it on the devil, and while praying, they would ask God to not let the plan of the devil, which was to ruin the family of Big Mommy, come to pass. They even sympathized with me and encouraged me to keep on praying for my husband, as God would soon vindicate him. They noted that they were sure he was innocent, and it was only a matter of time before God showed it. Their confidence in Richard's innocence showed me how deeply he and his mother had successfully deceived this church. The case ended rather quickly, and Richard was sentenced to 3 years behind bars. My expectations from the church was that there was an apportion part of the blame to Lydia, just for failing to properly parent her child, but I was disappointed to see the absolute level of brainwashing and manipulation by Lydia was much deeper than I thought. They paid us a visit at home, and Lydia began crying while claiming that her son had been framed up by enemies who were envious and wanted to spoil the family name. I know for a fact that she was hurt by her son, just by being locked up, but I was equally sure she wanted to exploit the situation. The church consoled her while they encouraged me to be absolutely strong. Well, if there was anything that the news of Richard's predicament brought to me, it was strength and joy. Before leaving the house that day, they promised that they would organize a prayer session in the church that, just because of Richard, they claimed they still had faith his situation could turn around. Nothing was impossible with God. I knew the prayer session was just a waste of time because if, the God they prayed to was just, he would support the justice system of our town and make sure Richard remained locked up, right? The day for which the prayer session has been scheduled finally came. I was looking forward to it, but this was not because I wanted a form of intervention that would lead to Richard's release to occur. I was only looking forward to that day because I wanted to take advantage of it to disappear for good. Lydia, I, and my kids were driving to the church where the prayer session commenced. 30 minutes into the program, and there was enough distraction for me to leave. I acted as though my kids needed attention, and I slipped out of the church. I had already booked a train ticket to the next town where I would start my life. I felt bad that I did not inform Pastor Mark about my plan. He had been a good father figure to me. Ever since I got into their fold, he always took it to a point of duty to call and check up on me, and this was why it was just bad, and he would have to discover, like the rest, that I've run away. Although I felt bad, I knew it was the right decision because, just like his members, he was deceived and held under the influence of my mother-in-law. I had to cut off contact with him as I did with her otherwise. She would easily know my whereabouts. I got into the new town, but life has not been easy. For a 19-year-old who did not own a college degree, there was not much work that could pay well. I rented an apartment with the little money I'd saved up while staying at Lydia's place, and I've been keeping a low profile ever since. I don't know if it was a result of the menial jobs which I picked up, but it turned out my low profile was not low when I recently had an unexpected visitor, my mother-in-law Lydia. Lydia showed up in my scarcely furnished apartment, and she had a sinister smile on her lips. I didn't need to invite her. She walked right in. She immediately answered the thoughts that were lingering in my head, as she claimed she had eyes and ears all over the place, and I could never get beyond her reach. There's something about Lydia that could make an individual tremble in her presence, and that was what was happening to me. All the same, I managed to ask her to leave my apartment. Otherwise, I was going to call the cops on her. Lydia was not moved by my threat to call the cops at all. She rather called me an ungrateful person who she had sheltered and given a life, only for me to repay her by taking away her grandkids for her just when she was grieving their father's arrest. According to her, the disappearance of my kids and I started a rumor that we had left because of her, thereby painting her as a terrible person in the town. However, I was glad to hear Lydia talk about the rumor. Besides, every part of the rumor was true. I had run away with my kids and cut them off from her because of her hate towards me, controlling nature, and hypocritical lifestyle. Lydia immediately demanded that I return to her house with her grandkids or handed them over to her as my presence was not even needed. Otherwise, I could not imagine the length she would go to make my life miserable. A surge of courage swept through me the moment Lydia talked about handing over my kids, and I began saying all the things I have just locked up inside. I left no stone unturned. I made her understand that her religiosity was just a facade she used to preserve her name and hide her true nature. I went on to tell her I would never allow my children to grow up anywhere close to her or the town where she lived, as they would likely end up like her son, who was locked up in jail for crimes she knew very well he was guilty of. The truth hurt, and it hurt Lydia a lot. It was the first time I was standing up to her, and she was so mad I had implied she was a failure at motherhood. She looked at me with an angry glance before making her way out of my house without uttering any more words. I told her on the way out that though she was right about me not being able to imagine what she could do to make my life miserable, well, she too could not imagine the length I was willing to go to just keep my children safe. It's been 3 days since the incident, and I'm still leaving with my kids in peace. I've not heard from Lydia, nor have I seen her make good of her threats. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. So today's story is a wild one. Another mother-in-law drama, but this one goes deep. I have 4 updates for you guys. I hope you're having a fantastic day. If you're new to the channel and you want to help support it out, hit that subscribe button. It really does support us. Alright, let's jump into update number 1. I'm currently planning on going back with my kids to Lydia. I know it's something you're probably shocked to hear, and it is not something I planned, but Lydia was not joking when she said that she was going to make my life a living hell. I woke up yesterday morning to the sound of consistent knocking on my door. To my surprise, it was several agents from the Child Protection Services. I felt they had missed their way when they introduced themselves, as there was no reason why agents from the CPS should be in my house, but after asking my name, they confirmed that they were at the right place indeed. They immediately noted that they were carrying out an investigation into the endangerment of twin boys, and they called the names of my kids. I was at peace when my neighbors, so I asked who had reported the case to them, and they were not confirmed, but they took Lydia's name. I listened to them read out all that Lydia had reported, and it was absolutely preposterous. She claimed that I had endangered the lives of my own kids by taking them out of the comfort of their own home, which their father had provided them for, when I had no tangible means of livelihood and had put them in an environment that was not favorable to a growing child. In a nutshell, she was saying I was incapable of raising my kids. I tried explaining to the agents that Lydia was just a pained mother-in-law who was not happy I was no longer under her control. But they refused to listen, and they said they were acting on direct orders from their superiors, and after going through my apartment, they said that they would need a few days to evaluate if the kids were indeed safe under my care, but noted that from what they could see from face value, I was likely going to lose custody of my kids in just a few days. The words of these agents scared the absolute crap out of me, and I could not imagine losing my kids. I pondered on what to do all throughout the day, But my worries were far from over, and I was slammed with a lawsuit. By evening, from you-know-who, Lydia. She was suing me for libel, and I think the lawyer called it character assassination or something of that sort. The claim was that I was spreading false rumors, which was damaging to her image. Lydia was demanding huge compensation, as she claimed most of her clients who usually patronized her had pulled back. I had to call Lydia to apologize and seek peace and ask you not to blame me. What would a 19-year-old do in such a situation? I didn't have the money for legal battles, and I was not willing to lose my kids to child protection services. Besides, my kids could be handed over to Lydia, who was their next closest relative they had. Lydia picked up her phone and asked if I still doubted her capability to ruin my life. I pleaded with her to end the whole thing, but she insisted I came back with my kids. I have a few days to go before Child Protection Services visit again and does the unthinkable. Update number 2. I don't know where to start by making this update. Lydia's image has been restored, while I'm now seen as the quote ungrateful daughter-in-law. I went with my kids to Lydia's place to avoid having them taken away. I got to the house, but Lydia, who was excited to see her grandkids, was not willing to call off the investigation or lawsuit, even after I had pleaded with her to do so. She said I had done her lots of damage, and it was not something she could easily let go. She demanded I stood in front of the church and told them I had acted foolishly and apologized to her. There was no other option. Lydia wanted the public apology to make sure the rumor, which was going around, was invalidated. It was a bitter pill for me to swallow, but I knew that I had to do it. I went with Lydia to meet with Pastor Mark, and he was surprised to see me after a long while. He asked why I had gone AWOL and dented my mother-in-law's name and image when there were women who would kill just to have the kind of mother-in-law that I did. I apologized to him. I had acted foolishly, but I now saw my wrong. Pastor Mark went to say that I had broken my mother-in-law's heart and trust, and it was something I would need to spend time rebuilding. He asked that I went back and submitted to her and pleaded with Lydia to please overlook all I had done and take me back as her daughter. Lydia, who had been in a posture that depicted triumph, immediately said that she held no grudge against me. She claimed she had even forgiven me the very moment I had run away and put her name in the mud. This woman is a snake, and it's a pity I'm the one who knows about it. We were about to leave the pastor's office when I asked that he allowed me in the church to talk to them and address the situation. This was Lydia's idea, even though she wanted to dissuade me from doing it. She had asked me to insist that the pastor allowed me to talk to the congregation. The platform was given, and I stood before the church. It was my first time there in a long time, and they wanted to hear my side of the story. I told the church that I had acted in a way that was not befitting, and I had abandoned my mother-in-law Lydia, who had been so good to me at a time when she was vulnerable and needed me most. I asked that whatever had transpired between my mother-in-law and me should not make them see her other than the selfless lady they had always seen her as all these years. I looked at Lydia right from where I was standing, and she cleaned her eyes as though I said we were touching her. People met her afterward and said they were glad God had finally vindicated her and put the rumor mongers to shame. Lydia and I got back home afterwards, and she ended the whole legal trouble with just one call. Even the Child Protection Services dropped the investigation. Update number 3. I'm currently planning something against Lydia, but don't be scared from me. With what I now know, the odds are greatly in my favor. Lydia had been treating me like trash ever since I've moved back to her house with the kids, and she barely lets me spend time with them, except when they needed to be fed or cleaned up, and she's turned me into a nanny for my kids, and there was nothing I could even do about it. She had me just where she wanted me. This wickedness went on for 2 months, and I could not take it anymore, so I decided to visit my pastor. tell him the truth behind everything, and pleaded with him to intervene in the situation. I got to Pastor Mark's office, and he could already tell I was not happy. I began pouring out my heart to him, and I began by telling him that the selfless woman who they all knew was the most hypocritical person I had ever met in my life. I had the pastor's interest in that exact moment, and I explained the origin of Lydia's hate towards me and how I come back and make a public apology to her because she had blackmailed me into doing so. Pastor Mark listened attentively while I spoke, and I felt that I was saying was getting to him in the way I expected, but that was far from it. Rather than get the promise of an intervention, I was rebuked by the pastor. He said I was letting myself be used by the devil by making such accusations against someone who both the church and society knew to be someone who lived for others. He sent me out of his office and threatened to kick me out of the church if I ever said another word to him, to someone else. I was very disappointed and also angry at the way the pastor had handled the issue. He didn't want to investigate the matter, he just jumped right to the conclusion. I got to the house and Lydia was waiting for me, and she said I was stubborn and warned that if I ever plotted against her, she would kick me empty-handed out of the house and make sure I never saw my kids again. What she said meant she knew where I was coming from and the contents of the discussion I had with the pastor. There was no way she would have known if he had not informed her, and the whole thing made me wonder why the pastor was acting like a lapdog to Lydia. I decided I was going to keep my distance from him. I simply apologized to Lydia and spent the next few weeks gaining her trust and drawing close to her. She was skeptical at first, as she knew every woman in my shoes would be angry at her. I, however, got her to be comfortable and careless with me as time progressed. I soon had access to her phone, and one day, my discovery both shocked and made sense to me. Lydia and Pastor Mark were both lovers. No wonder he had always supported and never questioned her innocence in all the times that she and her son had been involved in a scandal or another. Lydia and her pastor were both hypocrites who preached morality but practiced immorality. These folks even exchanged nudes. I had these images sent to my phone while I'm currently plotting something disastrous for the both of them. It's just so shocking that all the while Pastor Mark feigned ignorance, or Lydia's exhibited some form of fear for him. They have been working hand in glove this whole time. Updates. Number 4. This is my final update, and I can say my story has the perfect ending, which was never in sight. After I have gotten what could be the perfect tool for revenge, I kickstarted the divorce proceedings against my husband, who is currently in jail. I was divorcing him on the grounds of infidelity. I knew I would not be difficult one, since he was doing jail time for that. I approached Lydia the evening of the day when the process officially started, and I told her I was getting divorced from her son. I told her I was going away with my kids and she was to stay out of her lives for good. Lydia marveled at the sudden courage that I was displaying. She told me to not start a battle I would lose, and I said nothing. I just went to attend to the kids, and however, I sent the nude photos to Pastor Mark and immediately called Lydia. Well, Lydia approached me and was about to get violent, but I told her she would definitely regret it if she did. We were still talking when the pastor arrived at the house, and he had enough sense to know that getting violent won't solve a thing, so he had Lydia join him in begging me not to leak the photos. Well, I demanded they gave me some money and cash, while Lydia was to stay away from me and my kids forever. My reason for wanting the cash was that I knew Lydia could sue me for blackmail in the future, but it would be her words against mine. If I had gotten the money via bank transfer, the records would be there to prove it. The lovers were both desperate, so they readily agreed to my terms. I got the money, divorced Richard, and the court awarded part of the property that his late father had left him for me so I could take care of the kids. After everything was done, I went to the town media house the day before I was to leave the town to somewhere else, and I called out the hypocrisy of Lydia and Pastor Mark. The whole town erupted the next day for obvious reasons, and the shame which the lovers got was absolutely massive. Pastor Mark reached out to me via my mobile phone to heap curses on me, and I sarcastically told him that I would be praying for him and his lover. I'm currently doing well with my kids, but I can't say the same for Lydia, her lover, and his church. Thank you for sticking with me. Guys, this story was so crazy. I'll be honest with you. I was feeling so bad for OP throughout the story. And at the end of it, I was just thinking, man, this pastor, this mother-in-law, they're probably going to get away with everything. But it turns out that OP had found something very, very, very bad in their phone. And why I say it was bad is because it was enough to completely ruin their image, which it seems that's all they cared about. So we notice at the end of the story, OP finally gets a little bit of freedom and is able to do what she needs to do. Guys, let me know what you thought about this story. I also felt bad for OP because she gave in to the mother-in-law and she was treated so poorly by the guy who got her pregnant. I mean, there was just so much going on with this story. I would like to hear from you guys though, so drop your comments down below in the comment section. I love to reply, read all the comments, so go ahead, comment away. If you guys are new to the channel, my name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate stories every single day, and we cover a lot of different topics. So guys, if you want to do that, hit the subscribe button. I'll catch you tomorrow. And another quick little thing, if you want to follow my Instagram account, you can find it in the description below. I'm going to have daily short stories as well as other channel updates, so check out that. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and just remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.